Delighted to be back in Ballybunion. A little disappointed that you didn't manage the weather quite as well as you normally do, but yeah, tomorrow. I'm also conscious that we're sitting in really, really the most comfortable chairs I've ever sat on anywhere, even in somebody's living room. So wherever they came from, 10 out of 10, they're fantastic. But I've my back to whatever action is going on. So if anybody sees a cow or anything flying past, let me know, because I really wouldn't like to miss it. But it's a perfect night to actually, I think Anne mentioned about drinking wine and being cosy, and all of that is obviously synonymous as well with reading books. So it's an ideal night to sit and have a great old chat about writing and about books. And particularly about women writing. I mean, Joan mentioned conversations, and that women in media is all about conversations, and conversations are all about stories. And women telling women's stories is really important, and it's something that we don't hear enough of, as again Anne mentioned, in media generally. But the one place where we do probably outweigh the men is in women's fiction and in books. So we're going to explore a little bit of that, but we're also going to talk about the art of writing and about how writers write, etc., etc. And I've got a great panel, and I'm very grateful to all of them for being here. Let me introduce them to you. Right beside me here is Sinead Moriarty. Sinead is a Dubliner. She grew up surrounded by books, as her mother was also a writer. Sinead is probably also known to as a journalist who started to write in her spare time. She writes a weekly column for the Irish Independent. Her latest book, which is number 14, I think, am I correct, will be out next week, called 7 Letters. And Sinead, also along with Rick O'Shea, heads up the Eason Must Read book club, so we'll hear a little bit about that as well. I'll introduce everybody and you can give them all a clap at the end. Beside Sinead is Claudia Carroll. Again, Claudia is a well-known face from TV's Fair City, where she plays, I think you have described her as Snooty Cow Nicola. Claudia also began writing while she was meant to be doing something else in the dressing rooms in RTE. And I think your first novel was He Loves Me Not, and you are now on the 16th, which is out in paperback around now, called The Secrets of Primrose Square. And then finally, Felicity Hayes-McCoy. Felicity is actually a Dubliner by birth, but she's a Kerry woman by every other measure, I think. I don't think she'd mind me saying that. She divides her life. She's actually a woman who I think leads the life I lead in my head, which is that she divides her time between the centre of London, where she has worked in media and the BBC there, and Dingle, which sounds absolutely perfect.
West, Barbara.
Sorry?
Dingle. Back west.
Oh, back west. I do stand corrected. Felicity has written a series of Finn Farron novels, which are all based in a peninsula that sounds a little bit like Dingle, although it's totally fictional. But she's also written a fascinating memoir, which I want to talk a little bit about later on, called The Woven Silence. So will you please welcome our 3 writers? Just for our audience, I mean, I think Felicity is probably well got because you're a nearly native. But have Sinead or Claudia got any associations with Kerry that might be useful at this juncture? Sinead?
Yeah, well, Moriarty's Kerry name, so
Okay.
we are Killarney Kerry. Yeah, so that's where we're from originally.
Okay,
Yeah.
Claudia, you better have something to pull out of the hat.
When I was in school, I did not go to a posh school. And the way transition year students now get skiing trips to France and all of this malarkey. We went to a grave in Dingle. Peg Sayers. Yes. And I remember thinking it was covered in graffiti, a bit like Jim Morrison's in Père Lachaise, except it was slightly less respectful. It said things like, "Die, bitch, Peg." You have to be of a certain vintage to get how awful Peg Sayers was.
I'm actually jealous. I studied Peg as well, but never knew she had a grave that you could go and visit.
We could do it tomorrow, Barbara.
Yeah, maybe that's what we should do. Okay, I'm going to start with the kind of obvious question first. Sinead, I'm going to start with you. Did you always want to write? I know your mother was a writer, although I didn't think she wrote fiction, did she? But you would have obviously seen her writing. Was it something, therefore, that you always wanted to do?
Yeah, so my mum took myself and my siblings to the Waxworks Museum when we were young, and we didn't have a clue who anybody was, none of the Irish historical figures, much to her horror. So being a doer, she and her friends sat down and they started to write children's books about Irish historical figures like Yeats and Joyce and Jonathan Swift and Gráinne Whale. And so that's kind of what she did. And I saw her being turned down by publishers, and then I saw her getting published. So that was obviously, for me, I kind of went, okay, so this can be done. But I'm the youngest, and my sister is 3 years older than me, and she was really, really bright, like an absolutely voracious reader. I mean, I was a good reader, but she was in a different league. So I suppose in a way I didn't really have the confidence to think I was good enough. But I always loved English, loved writing essays and all that kind of stuff. But it wasn't really until I was 30 and I was working as a journalist in London, and I decided, okay, it's now or never. So I joined a creative writing group. So it took me a long time, but actually I probably didn't have enough to say until then, so I think it was the right time.
That's interesting, yeah. And Claudia, what about yourself? Was writing always there?
Well, to me, book deals were things that happened to other people. And I just couldn't equate, I was always writing stories, writing plays actually, particularly bad ones, and shoving them into a drawer. And then I read a lovely quote from the late great Maeve Binchy, and she said, "The drawer is your friend." And she talked about how, we all scribble things and they go, "Oh God, that's so bad," and you shove it in the drawer. And she just made the point, she said, it's highly unlikely a publisher is going to walk past your house and knock on the door and say, "You wouldn't by any chance just, lying around, we could take a look at it." You go, "Actually, it's funny, you should ask." So you have to be brave, you have to be, as Sinead said, proactive. So that was very much my journey, and I had an awful lot of help from an awful lot of amazing, amazing women. But I think, I don't know if you'd agree, Felicity, but you find this in the sort of fiction that we would write, commercial fiction. The support you get from women is actually astonishing. You don't get that in the acting profession. We'll come back to that.
That's very interesting you should say that, because you're all obviously to an extent in competition with each other. So I've noticed that, I know a lot of writers, that there is this terrific kind of camaraderie between them. Felicity, you were later to writing, I think, if you don't mind me saying, am I correct?
Well, I was later to writing books, but I started life as an actress. I began working I never had played in the English language before I went to London. I began in the Damer Theatre, Osgoyle, in Dublin, working in Irish plays. And then I went to London to drama school. I came out at the other end of drama school, and it was only 1 year. I had done Irish and English at college. And I came out of drama school, and there's this awful thing when you finish your training in anything, where you kind of go, "Oh God, now I actually have to do something?" And it's like, oh Christ, how do you even start? And I was terribly lucky because I had done a bit of radio when I was at drama school, and I had got a job at the BBC in radio drama. And I went straight into the New Shakespeare Company in Regent's Park after that. And it was all great, and there was money coming in for a whole summer. And then, gadunk, that was nothing. So what I did, cunningly, I said, what do I have to sell here in London that most actors probably haven't? And the answer was the Irish language. So with one bound, I went to what used then to be there, which was the BBC Schools Rep, which no longer exists. And I went in and I got hold of a producer, and I said I wrote all these wonderful scripts for kids, and was she interested? And I hadn't written a thing. And she said yes, she was interested, and could I send one by next Wednesday? And I completely panicked, and I came up with this completely mad story about how I had, they were all in a suitcase in a flat that I had left them in, and I would get them, and I went away and I wrote a script, and I based it on an Irish folktale, and I crammed it with Irish language words, and I sent it in to her. She was interested in it. It fitted a hole in her programme, and then I was able to say, and of course I'm an actress. And I got paid twice. So for years I was writing scripts purely in order to give myself work. And then one day I had a job over here and I had a show going on over there, and the thing split. And then for years that was what I was writing for. I was writing for television and radio. And it's only, which is why I'm so far behind you guys, I'm only on book 6, which is why I only came to writing novels quite late in life.
And I'm just wondering, with any of you, is writing something that you, because you're now full-time writers, is writing something that you have to do? Is it a way that you make sense of the world? Is it something that once you stop, for example, if you're away on holidays, that you actually have a need, not just, it's not just the need to make money, but the need to actually get back to writing again? Sinead, you're nodding.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a compulsion for me, and when I finish a book, my husband gets really nervous because I take time off and I'm really narky because I'm unhappy when I'm not writing. I don't know what to do with myself, and it's definitely, you know, at difficult times in life, I've kind of immersed myself in writing, and it's my happy place. It's where I can go not to think about anything or worry about anything. I think it's an amazing privilege, particularly as a woman, and, you know, I'm a mum and all that kind of stuff. I think to be able to disappear into your head for 5-6 hours a day, it's like, it's kind of a form of mindfulness, I think, for me. It's an absolute compulsion, yeah.
Claudia, would you agree?
I do agree, and I think there's nothing like a deadline to put manners on you. So I know I'm kind of a deadline driven, and you think, you know, book deadlines are funny because a publisher might say, okay, well, you've got until August 2020, and you think, miles away, and it creeps up on you. It just creeps up. So for me, it's like doing the leaving cert every single year. Because my contracts are a book a year. So, you know, you're maybe 6 months...
That actually doesn't sound that great.
In a good way. But you'd spend maybe 6 months doing a first draft. And that's where you throw the kitchen sink at it and everything. And, you know, you might have loosely plotted. Well, you would have plotted, of course. But you go down, maybe meander down subplots that mightn't make it to the final draft. And then you go through your editor's your first reader. And they are the person who will come to you and say, okay, look, just lose all this, cut this, develop this more, and you're hacking through it very roughly, broad strokes. But then you're finessing and finessing and finessing, and by the time you get to like your 4th, 5th edit, it's down to the copy edits, which is what I call the anorak edit, which is all the little nitty-gritty nuts and bolts. I had one actually just last week where I had a character goes to Dublin Airport and gets on the 8 o'clock flight to London. And the note came back, there is no 8 o'clock flight to London. There is a Ryanair flight at 7:50 to Stansted, and there is a flight on Aer Lingus to Gatwick at 8:05. Kindly specify. And I thought, okay, well, that's why you have an editor. That's, you know, but it is. I do agree with Sinead. It is. I think if you have a need to tell a story, and I don't know if you agree, Felicity, but in the acting profession, over the age of 40, it's like a tap being turned off. The job's just stopped. Over the age of 50, good luck. Unless you're Nicole Kidman.
But after 5 is good. 85.
And I mean, after 50, you're going to be really busy fighting aging. You know, I mean, there's no room for anything else after that. You mentioned plot there when you were describing that. So which is for you the first? Is it the plot or the characters?
Character all the way. I think probably because my background is in soap opera. And I think, you know, if you watch something like, say, for instance, Coronation Street, and soap opera is very much about women, but where it's women and their men, it's all very relationship driven. And that's fine in one way, but I think what I love about fiction is that it's not all about relationships. It's about a whole load of other issues. I'm just thinking of your last book, Sinead, it was about a mercy killing. You know, I mean, these are not fluffy books, they're not at all. And so I think character, I think if you look at something that's been going for years and years, like say, just off the top of my head, Coronation Street, plot lines come and go, and you have the same characters who are married this many times and divorced, but it's character that I think you follow. I think if you get the characters right, for me, you will go the journey with them. But if the character's wrong, I know myself, I give up.
And have you ever, would you agree with that, Felicity?
Well, certainly the character-driven thing, and I think probably it's because we both come from a theatre acting background, because you know, your starting point when you go into a story as an actor is, there's always been this thing about, you know, somebody says, I'm going to do Romeo and Juliet, and they say, what's it about? And the person says, it's about a nurse, because they're playing the nurse. They're not playing Romeo or Juliet. Well, I think, yes, character for me, but you know, I always feel like an idiot on panels like this, because inevitably people say that they're driven, you know, that writing is their happy place and writing is you know, every day. I'm not, at all. I mean, I love writing, and it's what I do for a living, and it's what I've always done for a living. I've never had a real job, but I am driven by nothing but deadlines, and I do it for the money. You know, that's what I do, and it pays my bills. Now, that does not mean that any more than any other job anyone does, you approach it saying, I hate this and my real life is somewhere else. Because actually, I think, you know, when you are working to deadlines and there is no real life anywhere else, you're doing the thing you're doing, and yes, you live in those characters' lives. But for me, the the shaping of the thing, the making of the thing is intellectually interesting. The characters are emotionally fascinating. And from everything that I have written in the novels has been about community, because I started with the place. I mean, I drew the map of my peninsula on a napkin in a cafe right at the start, because for me, all of the characters were going to come out of the place that they lived, and they were going to present themselves to me, and their relationships with their neighbours were going to present themselves to me in terms of, I mean, literally, whether they were mountainy men or whether they were women from who had moved into the town from being raised on a farm. All that sort of background is what made them people. So for me, it's place makes people, and then people make stories.
And how difficult, I mean, you just mentioned there that the thing about the flight to London, there is no flight at whatever time, to London. How irritating is it when you're in the middle of this creative, what the rest of us would think is this amazing creative process in your head, where you're dreaming up these characters and dreaming up these stories, to be kind of dragged back down to earth by somebody saying to you, there isn't a flight at that time, so you'll have to change it, or, you know, what kind of research on a day-to-day level? I mean, I can understand research if you're doing a historical novel, but on a day-to-day level, does it really matter that there isn't a flight to London?
Because if you were, you know, you've got to have the nitty-gritties right. The devil's in the detail.
And readers would get annoyed by that.
Yeah, I mean, you know yourself, if you see something that's factually incorrect, it's just great. You just think that's not properly researched. And things, you know, we all do reams and reams of research, but it's amazing, the stuff. Editing frightens me, because the stuff you miss. It's just astonishing. You think, I had one recently, we changed a character's name, and it went through about, because you come to a point where you don't see the wood for the trees, and we went through about 4 drafts, and it was one sub-editor who said, that's a different name. It went four of us, me included, missed it, because you're just too close, you're focusing on other things. So editing, I find it frightening, but deeply necessary in my case.
Yeah, and how terrifying is the blank page? That's the, you know, when you sit down to start your new book. You know, you've published 1 or 2, and you now have the next one, and you all mentioned deadlines. When you sit down, even though you have your idea of maybe characters and your plot, how terrifying is the actual start?
But just on an interesting point, so we have character, we have place, and I start all my books with an issue that I'm interested in, and that's why I love doing these panels, because I think it's really interesting, because everybody works completely differently. So for me, it's an issue, something, you know, so my last book was about a mercy killing. So for me, research. So by the time I sit down to the blank page, I'm pretty sure where I'm going. I'm a plotter and a planner. I mean, I love the idea of sitting down and just going with it, but it just doesn't work for me. But interestingly, just on issue kind of driven stories, I interviewed Leanne Moriarty, who you may know. She wrote what's called Big Little Lies, and amongst many other things. And it was kind of Moriarty meets Moriarty. Anyway, I went for dinner with her afterwards, and I was telling her a couple of years before I had this, I thought it was an amazing idea, and I sat down and I tried to make it work, and I just couldn't, and my heart sank, and after 50,000 words I just had to accept that it wasn't going to work, and I had to bin it. And 3 months later her book came out, and it was the exact same plot, and she had absolutely nailed it. She had done what I was trying to do, and I was saying that to her, and I was saying, you know, do you think that's really weird? And she's so funny, she's so Aussie, she goes, nah, I reckon we read the same article in the newspaper. Because I was kind of going, it was in the ether, and it's like magic, and it's creativity at its finest, but she was like, nah. But what was interesting was, it was the exact same plot. 3 couples living in a cul-de-sac, and they all go to a dinner in one person's house, and there's an accident with the child. It was unbelievable. But anyway, she nailed it. But I suppose the point is, there's so many ideas in the world. I just think life is fascinating, and people are fascinating. And I think when you're a writer, you have like a little switch in the back of your head goes on, and you just listen differently, and you observe differently. And even, it's not even necessarily a conscious thing, you're just soaking in constantly information and that. But I must say, I love the research part. I've learned so much with every book. I absolutely love it. And it's actually kind of hard to stop. You have to make yourself stop.
Can I bring you back to your first book, and when your first book got published, when you get that deal, can you remember you must remember how it felt. First of all, getting the green light, getting somebody that says, yes, we're going to publish that. Tell me about that, and then tell me also about when you walk into a shop for the first time and you see your baby on the shelf.
Well, my first 2 books were turned down by everyone. I thought they were absolutely brilliant, and I sent them out, and I sat back and waited to get the big deal and go and live in the Bahamas, and everyone said no. And then I was living in London, so I started with the UK, then I went to America, no, South Africa, no, Australia, no, New Zealand, no. I spent more money on stamps than food, And eventually I realised the common denominator was me. And so I went, okay, they're clearly not good enough. So I wrote 2 books that were turned down by everyone, and that's when I joined a creative writing group because I realised I needed feedback. Because I was very private about my writing. And so it wasn't until my 3rd book that was published, so it was very special. I mean, I would have paid someone to publish it at that point. I just wanted to see it in a bloody shop, you know, but, you know, it's like, where do you get your ideas from? My first book was about infertility, and it was because I was struggling to get pregnant, and I decided to write a kind of a bittersweet comedy about it, and that definitely was the right time. You know, it hadn't really been written about before in that kind of way, and it was just at that time when it was coming out. They were one of the characters in Friends couldn't get pregnant, and people were starting to talk about it, Sex in the City, all that kind of stuff, and there was kind of less privacy and shame around it, and I think that was a lot to do with timing. So it was, you know, I'll never forget the day when I got the offer from Penguin. It was amazing. As I said, I would have paid them to publish it, so it was an extraordinary feeling.
But it's a real lesson in tenacity, isn't it? I mean, everybody knows about J.K. Rowling, but you know, this kind of your confidence takes such a kicking every time you submit something somewhere and it doesn't go anywhere.
And it's pre-email, so you're rejecting yourself because you have to send self-addressed envelopes. And then in your own writing, you're being rejected on a daily basis from all over the world. I could have papered my apartment. But you know what, it makes success all the sweeter.
Yeah, I guess so. What about you, Claudia? Do you recall that moment that you saw your baby on the shelf for the first time?
Never forget it. My first book was actually based on a true experience. And it was years ago when you were talking about just coming out of drama school, and I got cast in a movie, and I thought, oh, Hollywood, whoa, here we come. My mother was on her diet for the premiere, you know, this kind of thing. And the movie never saw the light of day, thank God, it was awful. But anyway, the director was terribly posh, and she said, we're going to be filming this in my family house. Okay. And she said, it's in Monaghan. Meant nothing.
Is it where?
Monaghan. Meant nothing. And the family house turned out to be Castle Leslie. And the family were the Leslie family. And now at the time, I have to stress, Castle Leslie now is like apparently absolutely 5-star, out of this world. Paul McCartney got married there. Do you remember To Your Woman? That lasted about 20 minutes. But anyway, but at the time it was held up by wallpaper, literally. Like on a night like this, you wouldn't survive. And the family were gloriously, beautifully batty. And it was hilarious. And the father would walk around naked. It was a night like this, like Wuthering Heights, you know, Heathcliff going past. And the father would walk around, just did not wear clothes, no nudist, inside the house. Film crew walking around. And there was another brother who wanted to be a woman. And then it was just hilarious. And there was literally saucepans and pots and pans. And I remember thinking, we were making this very forgettable film. And I remember thinking, turn the camera around and point at what is going on behind you, which is so much more interesting. So that was my sort of first kind of a comedy set against the culture clash of the Anglo-Irish aristocracy. Bonkers, but very funny, I hoped. And with the Hollywood elite coming to town. And it just went from there. But I think Sinead said a lot of it about the timing. Because the market has changed now. I think it's culture changes, culture shifts. I think people want. I think if you look at what's selling now, I remember looking at the top 10 on the Sunday Times or one of these about a year ago, and of the 10 books, 8 out of the 10 had the words either killing, dead, blood, or but death, bones. Yeah. So I think it's darkened, you know. But if you look at people's reading tastes, you see, you know, culture changes, culture shifts. That's evolution. Would you agree? Would you think?
I think that's right. I think, and I think that it's inevitable because one of the things we're doing is reflecting the world.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, there's a kind of a chicken and egg thing happening because the marketplace sees something that is successful, and immediately something happens that's big. You're just so used to your publisher. I'm not putting any pressure of any kind, but sort of saying, well, you know, it might be something like, and I don't know about you, but I just go dead when somebody says it might be something like. I just can't. And for me, the moment that I had 3 non-fiction titles out before the first of the Finn Farron series of novels, and it was absolutely magnificent and wonderful and fantastic to see them on shelves, but in a strange way, it wasn't as exciting as I expected it to be, and I didn't quite know why. And I still don't quite know why. The one thing I do remember is that A Woven Silence, that book that you mentioned, has on the cover a picture which was, the cover design was taken from a photograph of my mother and my two aunts, which was taken in about 1914. So 3 sweet little girls sitting in a studio looking very beautiful. And the Hodges Figgis did a window when I was doing the launch up there. They did a window with copies of the book there. And I did have this extraordinary thing of walking down Dawson Street, and there was Mummy and Kathleen and Evie sitting in the window, repeated and repeated and repeated, and that was wow. But the really wow thing was that after the lunch was over and we all went out, I had this insane, really stupid thing where I looked at these 3 little girls in the window and I didn't want to leave them. And they were just these little small little girls sitting looking out, and they had this really hopeful look on their faces because that was the picture we chose because of the nature of the book. And it was this real sense of feeling motherly about my own mother, and that was quite strange. But the one that got me in the jugular was the first of the Finfarron novels, because that was called The Library at the Edge of the World, and it was the first book that came out of my head, as it were, because it was makey uppy. It wasn't a non-fiction title, and the really fascinating thing for me was because they're published here by Hachette Ireland and they're published in the States by HarperCollins, and I discovered what I didn't know was there are very different design styles for covers on either side of the ocean, and so the Hachette covers, which are very beautiful, are all based on illustration that somebody does an illustration, and they're beautiful. In the States, it has to be photographic. They don't like pictures, they like hard-edged photo montage. And the thing that got me most was seeing the same book in 2 different covers, because it was this weird sense that it was conversations across the world. You were talking to people over there and you were talking to people over here, and it was the same book, but it was almost in a different accent. And I have one coming out on the 2nd of May, and it's called the Transatlantic Book Club, and it's about a conversation between the 2. And I think I've been moving closer and closer to that idea. I think we all have this notion. Oh, it is a fab title, yeah. And there's a fab backstory to it as well. But the lovely thing, I think, that the awful weirdness that's happening in the world in politics now is the more people are building walls, not mentioning any particular person who might be talking about building walls, I think the more the artistic community is trying to knock them down and build bridges. And I think that's, if one's talking about in the past, there might have been bloody, bony, hard stories out there. I think there's an awful lot of stuff that you might call feel-good fiction, and it's not fluffy. It's us saying, like Lyra, courage, love, reaching out. Lyra, there's a lovely quote on Twitter from one of the things that she said a while back, which was, it's very hard to fight with somebody when you've sat down and had a cup of tea with them. And I do think that is what we're in the business of talking about now. The conversations are about that, and they need to be.
That's very interesting. One of the things that always strikes me as somebody who writes for a living in very short bursts is that when you're a writer of a book, of a fiction book, the amount of work that goes into it, you've described the editing process, the research that goes into it, and then you publish, particularly here in Ireland, where markets are small, and your book gets published, yay, and you launch it, and it's up there, and hopefully it'll make the top 10. The shelf life, though, of books, they disappear then down to the back of the bookshop very, very quickly. How difficult is that? Sinead, again, you're nodding away.
Yeah, well, in the beginning you used to kind of have sort of maybe 6 weeks in the sun, and now you're lucky if you get 2. It's just snap, snap, snap. It goes. It's a bit like a movie opening, by the first weekend of a movie they know it's going to be successful or not. With us, it's only 1 or 2 weeks. So it's very different. It is definitely a very crowded market. I think non-fiction is having a big comeback. Obviously the essay is having a renaissance. Short stories, all that kind of thing. So you never know what's new and what's hot. And every time you meet your agent, Claudia and I had the same agent, she goes, right, okay, why don't you write this? And you kind of go, well, actually, you can only really write what you feel, what you feel passionately about. And I always say, when I do talks, you have to be passionate about what you're writing about. Otherwise, as you say, you won't get to the end. A book is like a marathon. A column is like a sprint. A book is like a marathon. So you really have to be, you have to train and you have to be engaged to get to the end. So I think it has to be about passion about your subject matter, and I mean some writers do follow trends, but not that many. But I think
You can't. You just can't. And also, publishers are always looking for the next big thing. And yet no one knows what that is, and you can't see it coming. It's like no one saw Harry Potter coming. Like no one saw, a kid who went to a magic school. No one saw just off the top of my head, do you remember the 50 Shades of Grey thing a few years ago? And it was so huge. And no one saw it coming. So you just can't.
It was only 50 shades, it wasn't 250.
But I think you have to connect yourself with what you're working on, because you will never go. You're asking somebody to pay whatever price for a paperback, and you're asking them to go on a 400-page journey with you. And that's a big ask, especially now when with social media our concentration spans, I don't know if you agree, but they're kind of shrivelling a little bit.
Yeah, but on the other hand, what I find interesting, it's almost like anything that goes really far in that direction, it'll go really far in the other direction as well, because I'm writing a series, and I keep thinking, are people going to keep coming back? But I guess the people you get are the people that you're going to get, and certainly the people you keep are the people who got the first one and are going to stick with you. But my books are very much about community, and they're very much about cross-generational storytelling. So, like with the Transatlantic Book Club, there is a love interest story. There's a love triangle, and the characters are in their 20s. But a hugely important strand for me, all the way across the book, is this relationship between two women who are best friends from national school when they met each other first, and who went through. The two of them were best friends. They married two best friends. The men are gone now. The women are widowed. They're still best friends, but it's a love-hate relationship, and it always has been. Always. And, Mary is big, and she's blousy, and she's difficult, and she's always been sure of herself, and Pat's always been the little nice one, but the truth of the matter is, they both know who's really in control when, all the way through their lives, and how utterly dependent they are on each other. And it interests me that the marketplace is interested in pushing the young relationship, the romance. And for me, the romance is very important. It's not that I'm only writing it because I need to write it, but you're able to reflect on the young relationship by looking at the older one, and vice versa. And it's the circle, and it's the wholeness of the thing that I think brings my readers back, because a lot of them are women of a certain age, but I'm always fascinated. I'm getting messages from online from women in their 20s who are reading the books, and the relationships they like are the elderly ones, or they like my principal character is a public librarian. She's in her 50s. She's come out of a terrible marriage, and she's now starting a relationship with a man who's slightly younger than she is, and that relationship is fascinating people. So I think that there is a kind of a sense that people are interested in more than the niche stuff that we find ourselves slightly pushed into as women writers. And it's completely understandable. You're trying to sell a book, you need to know what shelf to put it on. You need to know what genre it is supposed to be part of. I think the readers actually look across a much wider spectrum, and that's just as it should be. But the more you push in one direction, saying, quick, fast stuff, because there's nothing out there except social media now, the more likely you are to find huge numbers of people who say, actually, I like putting my feet up, really going with the 400 pages, coming back every night and reading one chapter.
Yeah, is that something that frustrates you as writers, as Felicity said, of what's now termed as women's fiction or women's commercial fiction or whatever like that you are telling stories that are largely about women from a female perspective, but that you kind of then get shoehorned into people thinking it's only women who are going to be interested in reading that. And what does that say about where women are in terms of equality? That our stories, which we still don't see reflected in an equal way in movies or on television drama. I know it's improving, but it's still a long way to go. But yet we have this wealth of great stories that are confined to books, which booksellers think are only really for the women. And in order for us to achieve full equality, surely those books need to be reaching men as well. And I'm not suggesting it's because the way they're written that it's not reaching men, but it's perhaps the way they're marketed.
Yeah, I mean, I think that does have something to do with it. I mean, I always thought that if Brooklyn, Gone to Bean's book, could easily be written by Maeve Binchy, and I'm not sure, would it necessarily be made into a Hollywood movie? Probably not. So I do think we still have a ways to go there. Yeah, and I think the way book covers are a constant fight. Every book cover is toing and froing. Yeah, absolutely. I don't want sparkles on my cover. There's no business there, So I just think there's a lot of toing and froing about covers and stuff. But I think it's changing. I think it is changing. People realizing that their stories about family relationships, they're dramatic, they're sad, they have everything in them. I think it's changing. Certainly when we started out, it was very much the Bridget Jones kind of vibe was out there, the Chardonnay swilling kind of girl. But I think that's changed. I think people realise there's a lot more to.
You mentioned the essay form earlier, and essays are big in publishing at the moment. Sinead Gleeson's book is just out, and Emily Pine before that. And again, very much telling very personal stories. Obviously, these are women writers. Is that going to be what sparks the change, perhaps?
Do you know, sorry to cut across to Sinead, but I was just going to say, I think fiction, to me, is streets ahead of what's happening in the film world, in the TV world, and sad to say, in the theatre world too. Do you know about the Bechdel test? Did you ever hear of the Bechdel test? Do you know what that is? It's basically if you have, say, a movie, for instance, if you have to pass the test, you must have 2 female characters. These 2 female characters must have a distinct name. Can't just be, waitress or girl in bar. Distinct name. And these 2 women must have a conversation with each other, not about a man. It's really difficult to come up with movies that pass the test. So for me, fiction is blazing a trail. Is that too strong a phrase? But female characters are there in all their dimensions, in all their glory. It's not happening in the theatre either. As you know, recently the Abbey, about 2 years ago, launched their centenary programme, and there was murder. There was just murder because there were no female writers. I think there's fantastic women playwrights out there. It's changing now, but very, very slowly, glacially.
Felicity?
I think that's absolutely right, and I think that the really scary thing about that Abbey story was nobody had noticed. That was the frightening thing to me. I mean, almost more than the fact that they hadn't got women in there. It was that how many meetings, and when you printed the programme up, did anybody spot it? And it was just an extraordinary idea that if the arts are about holding up a mirror to the world, and if they're there so that what we can all do is, instead of going out and murdering the king so that we can get the throne, or having the affair with our brother-in-law's sister, instead of doing it, we can look and see how it might be if it happened, and we don't have to commit the murder ourselves. We can see in the picture, in the painting, on the stage, in the film, what the results are, and we can talk about it afterwards. We can. Why do we have book clubs? It's so that people can read the books and then sit down and ask each other what they think about the characters and what happened and who they liked and who they didn't. And if you don't have people's actual experience, if there aren't mothers and daughters and aunts and little girls, as well as Harrison Ford playing some fantastically amazing and exciting male character, and if there aren't vulnerable male characters and little boys, how can we actually have the conversations we need to have? And that's the thing that was most frightening to me, that nobody had that conversation before they realised that the conversations weren't available.
I want to come back to book clubs in a minute, but Felicity, can I ask you to tell us a little bit about your book, your non-fiction book, The Woven Silence, because that was a kind of memoir around your grand-aunt?
Yes, she was.
And if you could tell us a little bit about Marion, just a little bit, and then I want you to explain The Woven Silence.
Alrighty. My mother's people came from Enniscorthy in Wexford, and my grandmother, like many a woman from rural Ireland, had gone up to Dublin, and she had married a man up in Dublin. And this would have been around 90, they got married around 1909, I think. And my two aunts, Kathleen and Evie, and my mother, were born in Dublin. And my grandfather worked in the post office. But my grandmother still had family back home in Enniscorthy. One of my grandmother's cousins was a woman called Marion Stokes. And long Irish families, basically Marion was of an age to be an elder sister to my mum and her sisters. And she was 19 when she joined Cumnaman, and she and her brothers went out to fight in 1916. And what a lot of people don't know, it's another bloody Dublin-centric story. You know, that it should be even 1916 was Dublin-centric as a story. The whole country was meant to rise, and as we all know, the whole country didn't rise. But it wasn't the case that only Dublin rose. And interestingly, the garrison in the Athenaeum in Enniscorthy was the last garrison to surrender in 1916. And my grandmother's cousin Marion was one of 3 women who raised the tricolour over Enniscorthy town, over the Athenaeum. And I knew Marion. Marion lived until 1987, so I knew her when I was at university. And I had no idea that she was out in 1916. I only found out when I was writing the book that she had 2 brothers who were out in 1916, and that's part of the story of the book. But the point for me of writing the book was, it was coming up to 2015, I knew that we were going to have the whole 1916 centenary thing, and I, like many other women, was absolutely determined that the women weren't going to be forgotten. So I started by thinking I was going to write Marion's story. And then I discovered something far more interesting than that from a woman's point of view. And that was that there was no story. I had never asked her. I asked Mummy once when we were in England, because my mother never talked about these things when she was in Ireland. And what she said was, she didn't like to talk about it. And I remember going to sell the book to the Collins Press, and I sat down with Con Collins, because the Collins Press, they've now actually just closed down the Collins Press, but Con was amazing because you were talking straight to your publisher. And I remember sitting down and rabbiting at him about Marion and 1916 and women and things. And he said, yeah, but Felicity, what's the book going to be about? I mean, is it about your relation that fought in 1916? And I said, no, it's about the fact that I don't know anything about my relation who fought in 1916. And he said, well, I don't know how that's going to work. And I said, well, Jesus God, nor do I. But will you commission it? And God bless him, he said, if I can put Collins's name and Dev's name on the back cover, I'll commission it. And he did. And it's called A Woven Silence, which is in fact a quote from Yeats. It's called A Woven Silence, Memory, History and Remembrance. Because as I mapped the story of the women in my family's lives onto the story of the state, on both sides, my paternal grandmother and my maternal one, there were these huge gaps, and I realised that in the 1970s I had gone to England partly because, having come out of university, I had been given these 2 totally contradictory messages. I was an educated woman, I had gone to university, I was in an Ireland which theoretically had a place for me, but at the same time I was still being told, I mean, I'm the generation I remember the contraceptive train, Maeve Binchy was my Latin teacher, and I remember Maeve talking about, writing about feminism then. That wave of feminism was there, but there was still this silence about the past, about my mother's family stories, my grandmother's stories. So that was what that book was for. It was about emptiness.
And you feel that this silence was something that was really about the women rather than the men, or was it a common thing?
It was imposed. The book is about the fact that if you actually start looking, you discover that, I don't know what Marion believed or felt. I don't know whether she was fighting she was a feminist or not. I don't know. And it's horrible that I don't know. But what I do know is I know what Common Amon said. I know what the proclamation said. They believed in equality, and there's some wonderful work being done lately. I mean, really, quite recently, I was looking on Twitter, people talking about work that's been done in women's studies, where they're bringing up more and more and more evidence of how angry the women felt, having gone out and fought and believed. There was one lovely quote from Hannah Skeffington on Twitter only a couple of days ago. We believed that our men who fought with us when they got into power would make sure we had equal power, but they didn't. And I lean over backwards not to blame anyone in that book, and I lean over double backwards not to blame De Valera or John Charles McCrae. But you can point a lot of fingers, and you can see the reality of how they got so far, and then they just got pushed under, and then it wasn't talked about. And we have to talk. We have to talk, because we were building on nothing. But actually, there was this whole structure that they had built for us.
But I think it's interesting because we now know that silence and secrets were so much a part of women's lives from the very foundation of the state, which brings us back to books and women's stories and why they are so important.
One of the things that really, really troubled me was my mother was a woman who, she was a woman of her time. She had numbers of... There were 5 miscarriages between my nearest brother and myself, and there was no question of contraception. She had stillbirths. She was terrified of her obstetrician, who I subsequently discovered was a man that you had every reason to be terrified of, so they obviously talked amongst themselves. But the thing that I found myself grieving most about, as well as her miscarriages, because siblings that never happened, was she really wanted to be a writer. She desperately wanted to be a writer. And I tell in the book about how, she got enough money for a typewriter, and then the reason why she lost it. But she never wrote, and I asked her ages afterwards when I was, things of mine were appearing on television, and she was always pushing me out of acting and into writing. And I said, why didn't you keep going? And she said, there just wasn't time. There just wasn't time. And it's like the woman who's just too tired. So, that's one of the reasons why I write, is because my mother wasn't able to.
That's great. Thank you, Felicity. Okay, how many people here... Book clubs. Loftus Lewis, who's in a book club. Oh, please let there be at least more than 1 or 2. Oh, there's not a huge... Oh, there's a few. Reluctant waves. Sinead, you're involved in the last, I think, year or so with the Eason's book club. Tell us a little bit, first of all, about that and your role, along with Ricochet there.
Yeah, so Eason's asked Rick and I to get involved in the book club, which we were delighted to do. So Eason's come up with a long list. They sent us boxes of books, and then we come up with 8 books. He chooses 4 and I choose 4. And it's brilliant because we get to promote other writers, which is a joy. I get to read tons of books that I wouldn't necessarily read. I'm completely pushed out of my comfort zone, which I also love. I'm also in a book club that my sister set up 20 years ago, and my mother's in a book club that's been going for 50 years, and they've seen it all, been through it all. And even in the kind of personal book club that I'm in, one of the girls, has recently been diagnosed with cancer, and we're all supporting her through it. And so we talk about books. We're very good about that. But it's also, we talk about life and lots of other things. But the book about Eason's is brilliant because we get to promote other writers, and we're always trying to push new Irish voices and stuff, and it's just great. It's an absolute joy. It's a joy to read so many books. It's a joy to promote other writers, and I think book clubs are incredible. I'm always trying to get my husband to set one up. I don't know why they're predominantly women.
Why?
It
That's what I
drives
was
me nuts.
just going to say.
He's a big reader. Why don't you get a couple of guys together and do one? I don't know. I think it's nuts because men are good readers too. Why don't they?
Yeah.
And also we do read a lot of non-fiction. In Ireland particularly, we were very strong on non-fiction. So Rick and I always trying to choose a non-fiction book as well. And we're strong on politics here as well. So I think book clubs are amazing. I think they're wonderful, and books are often very successful through word of mouth. And some of the book club ones, like The Choice. Remember, The Choice, I don't know, it was a huge one, and the Tattooist of Auschwitz. A lot of those are book club people just talking and word of mouth. So word of mouth is still the strongest way to get a book.
You know yourself,
sold.
like publishers can buy the best slots in the bookshop and they can have stacks of them, but if somebody says to you, you must read this is just drop everything, you will. Word of mouth, I think across the board, with a movie, with a play, it's absolutely critical. I'm in a book club too, it's really competitive. The food has to match.
That's why I left my book club. I kind of got asked to leave.
Where
but
did
that
you
was
live?
why I left.
Did
I wasn't playing the
you can
game.
join our one.
I wasn't playing the game at all. I wish somebody'd set up a book club where I have always got a... Well, here's a question. I don't know about you in the audience, but I always find that I will give a book until about somewhere between a third and halfway. And if I'm not enjoying it, then I'll finish it, because life's too short to be reading books you're not enjoying. And that's my problem with book club, is that I ended up getting books that I wasn't enjoying, and then I didn't read them, and then I got asked to leave. But should you give up on a book you don't like, or should you persevere?
Well, I've changed completely on that. I used to always persevere. I mean, I persevered through Salmon Rushdie's Midnight Children. It nearly killed me, but I felt I had to finish it. But I think that's because I commuted to work, which I no longer do. Now I'd give it 50%, and then if I really, really am enjoying it, I put it aside, because, as you say, there are so many magnificent books out there to be read. But that's only in the last couple of years. I would have always completed a book before that. But yeah, I think 50% is generous.
I do. Yeah, I think about 50% is more than generous. But I think, we have the same agent, as Sinead was saying, and Pat, who works in the agency, was saying that he often gets submissions. And people will, just submit a book in and hope for the best and all of that. And he said what they will do is, with the submission, they'll send it out to a reader. And the reader is independent, and they will come back, and they've no idea, they're reading it blind, they've no idea who wrote it. And they'll just come back with a reader's report. And he said very often the news isn't good, and very often he has the unenviable job of saying, sorry, but it's not for us. Best of luck, not for us. But he said he gets people sending in, 150,000 word manuscripts, and he'll have to make the awful phone call and say, sorry, not this time. And he gets people saying, oh no, hang on, it doesn't get good until 80,000 words in. It doesn't start getting good, that's just the build-up. And his thing is, well, no one's going to invest that much. There's just too much competing. But I'm loath to give up on any book, because I think someone sat down to write this. And, if nothing else, only out of respect for them, I will stick with it. But having said that...
You don't know.
I think Sinead's right, 50% of it is plenty. And but then it's interesting, because you do learn, even from a negative book, you think, why am I not engaging? Is it the character? Is it just boring? Is it, rule 1, thou shalt not bore.
And rule 2, if you have a character that, if your main character, for you, the reader, is somebody that you really couldn't care less whether they live, die, fall in love, don't fall in love, then there's no point, because you don't care what's going to happen to them. No matter what happens, it's not going to engage with you at all.
There's sort of different levels of reading too, though, isn't there? I mean,
yeah.
Aren't there? Isn't there? Anyway, I'm a speed reader. I can read incredibly fast, and I think it's just from years and years and years of being a student and learning lines as well. You crash things in very fast, and I can tell by the speed at which I'm reading a book how much I like it, because if I finish it incredibly quickly, it means one of two opposing things. It either means I adored it so much that I couldn't bear not to get to the end, at which point I will inevitably start at the beginning again. If I loved it, I will start again.
Oh, wow.
But often I get to the end and I think, well, thanks be to God, that's over then. It's like the thing where you have to finish the packet of biscuits. You don't want to finish the packet of biscuits because you're going to be fat, but the biscuits have to be finished, so you eat them really fast. That's what I do.
I have a rule where if I bring the book around with me, if it doesn't stay on the bedside table, if it comes in my handbag if I'm going somewhere, or if it comes down to the kitchen during the day, then I know it's a really good read.
Are you a Kindle person?
No.
Or
I have a Kindle, but only for travelling. There's nothing to me like an actual book.
Yeah.
And the same about newspapers. I don't read online either. I prefer to have a proper paper newspaper. Has anybody, before we finish up, has anybody got anything that they would like to ask one of our writers? I think, have we got a roving yoke?
Of course.
For Sarah down the end.
Oh, you can probably hear me anyway. My voice carries. Or no, we've got. First of all, just congratulations to you all. I don't know how you do it, because people often say to me, oh, you should write a book. It's so easy. So I know it's not. Sometimes I have opened up that Word document and stared at the screen and thought, now what would I write about? And the obvious is to take something from your own life, or a story that you do know about someone. did you find maybe your first books were about you, and then as you went on, they became more fictional? Have you written about friends or family, and have they recognised themselves? You know, is that a problem?
Sued.
So in other words, what's the line between reality and fiction?
Only Madeleine says the only real fiction in any book is the disclaimer at the start that says any resemblance to any person is living or dead is purely coincidental.
So has anyone fallen out with you over stuff like that? Seen themselves? Has anyone fallen out with you? You know, have they seen themselves in a book and go, how dare you do that?
No, I think you should be very careful, particularly as an Irish writer, not to make anybody recognisable. No. But minding your own life for your first book, I think, it tends to be something that a lot of people do. As I mentioned, my first book was about infertility. It wasn't about me, but it was about something that I'd gone through. So that certainly kind of gave me the confidence probably to write about that subject matter. But no, I think you should be very, very careful. I value my friends and family, so I'm not going to put them in a book.
I get worried. I mean, the Transatlantic Book Club, which is the one that's about to come out, is the only one of my Farron novels which is based on something real. I mean, its inspiration was something real. I discovered that there was an actual, real Skype book club quietly going on for the last 11 years in a small library, branch library in Clonmel, in Tip. Skyping to Peoria in Illinois. So they were actually running a Skype Transatlantic Book Club, and it just made a wonderful, wonderful starting point for a story. And I was very lucky because by happenstance I managed to get invited to go down to see how it works, because it's already, I pitched the idea of a Transatlantic Book Club and they bought it, and then I realised I didn't know how it physically would work, and those are the sorts of things your copy editor would ask you. So I went down, and I was aware going in the door that I had to give a kind of disclaimer before I started. Look, lads, the characters already exist, okay? 4 novels out there already, you know, so I'm not going to be basing it on anybody here. And not only that, but the plot lines already exist, because I was terrified that, because I dedicated the book to the real Skype book club, I was terrified that they would read it. Not that I would have put them into it, but people do see themselves in your books.
But they're very rarely the person they think they are.
Well, there is that.
So true.
But there are types in life, you know, and if you're writing about a book club, you know, it's fairly likely that there will be some person in there who will be quite like somebody that's in every book club. And that is the danger. I've never had anybody attack me or blame me or anything, but I have had, everybody has, don't put me in a book. And I don't think any writer ever wants to put anybody in a book.
But some stories are just so good.
But characters, but do you actually think, ooh, there's an interesting bus driver, I'll write about
This is
him.
a true thing, okay? This happened about 2 weeks ago. My friend, anyway, this friend of mine, her mum she's really dull. And I am so putting this in a book because it's just too funny not to. And I have to ask her permission, and she said, yes, you can use it. But she lives in this, her mum is very kind of, you know, bling, and she drives a sports car, and she has like fabulous jewellery, and, you know, but she's real dull, you know. And she lives in this gated community, and she was driving in with her soft top car and all of this, and the hair and all of that. And there were guys there, and they were illegally siphoning off water. And that's what they do in Dublin. They siphon it off, and they use it for car washes illegally. And she rolled the top was down. She went, "How are you, lads? How's it going?" And they went, "Oh, go on, missus, go on," you know. And they thought the middle-aged woman would ignore her. And she went, "What are you at there, lads?" And they said, "Look, go on, missus. It's a little gated community in Castleknock." And they said, "Just leave us alone. We have permission. We have permission." And she went, "Well, you know something, lads, it looks to me like you're robbing water for a car wash." And she said, "Lads, I've nothing against the walking man making a few bucks." She said, "I said to my son, Raymond, you have to bend the rules in this life." And she said, "Can I get your names?" And they went, "We're not giving you our names." And she said, "Well, let me give you my name. I'm Mrs. Kinahan." Hutch would have worked just as well. I am so using that. I'm sorry.
Has anybody else got a question? Sarah, would you pass the mic? Thanks.
I just want to ask about your writing rituals. Are you up at the crack of dawn in your pyjamas? Have you kind of, do you approach it like a working job, or what?
Yeah, great question. I do kind of school hours. I do sort of 9 to 3 or 9 to 4 every day. But when I wrote my first book in London, then I moved home to live here, and friends kept calling in and going, "What's the crack?" And I was going, "No, I'm actually working." And they're like, "Come on, you can write anytime." I was like, "No, I'm actually working now." And they thought I was taking myself very seriously, but like I don't take myself seriously, but I take my writing seriously. So that was an adjustment. Yeah.
I had the same thing when I started back at work, having been 10 years at home. I'm kind of saying gently to my friends, I'm actually trying to do some work. And they're like, yeah, right. And like that, keep knocking on the door. And I had to say, look, I actually am trying to work. You know, I'm really trying to work. And then they don't call at all. I have to actually go calling for them. So maybe they just don't like me anymore. Anyway,
I do the two things. I mean, I think that the idea that being in your PJs means you're not working is one of these terrible, terrible problems that writers have, because I can often be still in my PJs at 4 o'clock, and like I live in rural Kerry and I'm surrounded by very hard-working women who have, you know, farms to run and, you know, the husbands to look after and kids to get to school and things, and it's still the case that I'll have neighbours come in the door and look at me in absolute horror if I'm there in my PJs one o'clock. And I still hear myself saying, I started with emails at 6 o'clock, you know. Because you just get... But I do know writers who feel that they can't go to work at home unless they get up and get dressed properly and put on makeup. And I just don't understand it. But whatever it takes to get you to the screen.
I recently discovered the library. Because my mum recently moved back into my house and she thinks being at home all day equals on the DOS. Yeah. And you can't. So just the libraries are brilliant. They're absolutely brilliant. They're empty. There's Wi-Fi. There's peace and quiet. You can bring in a coffee. You know, it's brilliant. And no one will bother you.
do you find you need peace and quiet when you're writing? Do you need to be, you know, if you're writing in a busy house with you, I mean, I know you're a mum with kids coming and going, you do have an office or a room where I'm writing, I'm working and...
Well, I'm probably one of the only people who hates summer. I absolutely hate it because they're all for 3 months, they're swinging out of me, and by August I'm standing at the school gate and I'm like, get the fucking door. And everyone else going, oh, summer's over. I'm like, thanks be to Jesus, I'm already dreading it because I have a deadline and I don't know how I'm going to meet it. So no, I find school holidays actually really quite stressful. Yeah.
I hear you. Anybody else? Any other questions? No? Can I ask you just to finish up then? I'll ask each of you. What is the best and what is the worst thing about being a fiction writer specifically, not anything else?
The best thing for me is being able to find out more about characters I've already created, because my background is writing soap opera and writing television drama, and it's always the same. You know, there'll be 3 characters who are, as it were, downstage, or whose storylines are being pushed forward in a particular strand, and then those characters will disappear because the actors are going off to be in pantomime or something, and other characters will come forward. And being able to do that in fiction, I absolutely adore. You know, some character that only came in at the beginning just as a peripheral, I needed somebody to sit in that seat, as it were, suddenly becomes the central character in a story, and I just love that. And the worst thing about it, I suppose, is fear. It's the fear that, you know, you won't sell the next book, and then what's going to happen, and the fact that if you're afraid, you can't do it. When you are afraid, you cannot do it, and therefore you must not be afraid. So it's that thing of having to divide your mind, and that is, I don't know, you have to almost do exercise mentally and physically to get out of that.
Claudia? It's your best
I agree.
and worst?
I think the best thing, actually, I think as writers we work in such isolation. You know, you're on your own, you're in your own head with these characters all day, and it makes you a bit weird. So events like this are brilliant, actually. I would say this is one of the best things, because you meet other authors, other writers. I know in Dublin, like I would be very close to Sinead, and we have another group of pals, and we just get together and we're all huge talkers, because I think we spend so much time living in our heads. The worst thing, I couldn't agree with you more, is fear, and I think for me insecurity, just never feeling good enough, always just feeling everyone else is so much better. Insecurity.
Sinead?
Yeah. Good writing days and bad writing days. Good writing days are a joy. You think, okay, I've got this, and bad writing days, you think, I'm rubbish and crap. No one's going to read it. Why did I even start this? So it's the yin and yang of that.
And you've published so many books. Okay, just before we finish up, I just want to mention again that Sinead's latest book, 7 Letters, is out next week, correct?
Thursday.
Next Thursday. Claudia's latest book, which is her 16th, I think, is that correct? The Secrets of Primrose Square is now out in paperback. Brilliant. And finally, Felicity's latest in her Finn Farron series, the Transatlantic Book Club, will be launching on May 10th in Dublin. If anybody's in Dublin, on the 10th of May, it's a Friday, 6:30 in the Gutter Bookshop. We can do it all again and toast Felicity's new book.
In Dingle Gin.
Dingle Gin, which is world quality, isn't it? It's like...
They just won a World's Best Gin Award, and they're going to be pouring it out at my lunch, so I can't.
Ladies and gentlemen, can you give a round of applause to lovely authors?